Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. It wasn't a handshake that brought me to Meadowfield Hospital, a forgotten relic nestled deep in the sprawling fields of rural Kansas, but the lack of options. My name is Amanda Pierce, 26, a former med school dropout and the reigning queen of bad decisions. I had a knack for chasing red flags, and the $65 per hour night shift felt like a siren's call. They called it desperation wages in my old circles, a rate so high it practically screamed a warning. I arrived late on a gloomy Monday, the sky heavy with gray clouds. The hospital loomed ahead like a mausoleum, its faded white paint barely clinging to weathered wooden planks. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed above the main entrance, weakly lighting a now hiring sign taped to the glass door. Inside, the air reeked of antiseptic and something else, something faintly sour and metallic. The receptionist, a frail woman with hollow cheeks and sharp bird-like movements, handed me an ID badge before I even finished introducing myself. Her bony fingers pressed a folded paper into my hand. "Read these," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of a distant generator. Her eyes darted to the hallway behind me as if she feared something, or someone, might appear. The paper seemed unremarkable at first, its text so small I had to squint. But as I read, the weight of its words settled over me like a heavy fog. The rules of Meadowfield Night Shift 1. Do not lock the doors to room 6 after 3:33 a.m. 2. If you hear whistling from the east wing, find another room immediately. Do not look for the source. 3rd, patients in room 12 will request water. Serve it only if the cup contains exactly 4 ice cubes. 4. If your ID badge goes missing after midnight, leave the building immediately and do not return for 72 hours. 5. The elevator is off limits between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Use the stairs. 6. Do not acknowledge the man in the janitor's closet even if he speaks to you. 7. If a patient checks in without a name, do not add them to the registry. 8. Do not use the break room microwave after midnight. 9. The phone will ring once between 1:15 and 1:30 a.m. Do not answer it. 10. If you smell lavender near the nurse's station, keep your head down and count to 10 before moving. 11. When your shift ends, leave immediately. Do not look back. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, forcing myself to breathe normally. Rules weren't unusual in hospitals, but these felt wrong. They seemed born from desperation, not regulation. As I made my way to the staff quarters, my thoughts raced. Who wrote these rules and why? Every instinct in me screamed to leave the moment I walked through that door. "Welcome to the team," the receptionist called after me, her voice trembling. I didn't reply. The first night at Meadowfield Hospital passed uneventfully until it didn't. The shift began in silence, as most graveyard shifts do. The air hung unnervingly still, like an attic where dust swirls in unseen drafts. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their hum a vibration in my skull. I spent the first 2 hours organizing supplies at the nurse's station. The hospital, though operational, bore the scars of age. The walls were peeling, exposing raw wood beneath. Floors groaned with every step, and flickering lights only added to the unease. Still, there was nothing overtly sinister. Just an old building, I told myself, a remnant of better times. At 1:15 a.m., the phone rang. I froze, recalling Rule 9. The phone will ring once between 1:15 and 1:30 a.m. Do not answer it. It rang only once, as promised. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I stared at the phone, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. My hand itched to pick it up to test if the line was dead, but the rules echoed in my mind. A warning bell. I stayed put. Around 2 a.m., I began my rounds. The hallways seemed endless, shadows stretching in the dim light. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have. Room 6 was The door to room 6 was slightly ajar, the darkness inside pooling like ink. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to move on. The rules echoed in my mind. Do not lock the doors of room 6 after 3:33 a.m. Brushing off the unease, I left it behind. It wasn't until I reached the east wing that I heard it, the whistling. Faint at first, like a tune carried on the wind, but there was no wind inside Meadowfield. The sound grew louder, freezing me in place as my heart hammered in my chest. It was cheerful, unnervingly so, like a children's melody. Yet it was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. Rule 2 surfaced in my mind. If you hear whistling from the east wing, find another room immediately. Do not look for the source. I spun around and bolted toward room 10, the nearest door. My hand shook as I twisted the handle and shoved it open. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. Good enough. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, holding my breath. The whistling continued outside, then stopped, abrupt and jarring. Silence swallowed the air, thick and suffocating. Minutes passed, or perhaps seconds. Time blurred. When I finally cracked the door open, the hallway was empty. Nothing moved, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. Back at the nurse's station, I struggled to shake off the feeling, but the weight in my chest lingered. It wasn't just the whistling. Something had been watching me, waiting. The clock read 3 a.m., 2 more hours to go. I tried distracting myself by reviewing the patient log. Meadowfield housed only a few patients, mostly elderly locals with no other place to go. That's when I noticed something strange. Room 6, the one I'd passed earlier, was listed as occupied. A name was scribbled in messy handwriting, Evelyn Carter. My stomach churned. I distinctly remembered the light being off, the bed untouched. No one had mentioned an admission. I stared at the rules taped inside my locker. Rule 3. If a patient appears in room 6, check the log. If their name is listed, you must visit them immediately. Do not let them speak first. The rule felt ridiculous. Why would it matter who spoke first? But the memory of the whistling gripped me, my curiosity smothered by dread. I approached room 6 cautiously, each step dragging as though the hallway had stretched. The closer I got, the louder the buzzing in my ears grew, a low, insistent hum, as if the hospital itself was urging me to turn back. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. I pushed the door open, and faint moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting pale shadows across the room. On the bed lay an old woman, her silver hair fanned across the pillow. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Relief flooded me. She was just a patient, a perfectly normal, sleeping patient. "Evelyn," I managed, my voice cracking. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto mine, unblinking, wide, too wide. Her lips twitched as though about to speak, but I remembered the rule just in time. "I'm your nurse for the night," I blurted. "Is there something you need?" Her mouth shut, and for a long moment she simply stared, her gaze hollow and unsettling. Then slowly she raised a frail hand and pointed to the bedside table. A glass of water sat there, untouched. My throat tightened as I picked it up, my hands trembling. I offered it to her, but she didn't take it. Instead, her finger shifted, pointing to the corner of the room. I turned my head slowly, every nerve in my body screaming not to look. For a fleeting second, I saw it, a dark, towering shape shifting in the shadows, taller than any human. My heart thundered, my breath caught. When I turned back to Evelyn, her eyes were closed again. Her breathing was soft even. She looked as though she hadn't moved. The glass slipped from my hands, shattering on the tile. The sound jolted me, but my feet were already moving, carrying me out of the room in a blind stumble. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me, and leaned against it, panting. My mind scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Back at the nurse's station, I checked the log again. Evelyn Carter's name was gone. My hands trembled as I pretended to review patient information, the events in room 6 replaying over and over in my mind. The eerily still woman, her silent gestures, and that ominous shadow. Could it have been a trick of the light? A mix of nerves and the oppressive atmosphere? Yet the rules gnawed at me. Rule 3 had been correct. Her name had appeared and vanished, as if the hospital had a will of its own. I flipped the rule card in my fingers, the neat handwriting taunting me with its cryptic warnings. I tried to focus, just a few more hours until my shift ended. The hospital seemed quieter now, its silence broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. The clock read 3:13 a.m., the infamous witching hour. That's when the flickering began. At first it was subtle, a faint buzz overhead as the lights dimmed momentarily before returning to full brightness. But as the minutes passed, the flickering grew erratic, shadows dancing wildly on the walls. My stomach tightened when I glanced down the hallway to the patient rooms. The lights above the corridor pulsed unnaturally, their glow casting jagged, shifting shapes. One shadow lingered too long, far too long. I grabbed the rule list again, hoping for clarity. Rule 5. If the hallway lights begin to flicker, do not investigate. Stay at the nurse's station no matter what you hear. As if on cue, I heard it, a faint tapping sound, like footsteps. The hairs on my arms rose as an icy dread settled over me. My instincts screamed to grab my things and run, but the rule was clear. Stay put. The tapping grew louder, sharper, echoing down the hallway with a deliberate rhythm. It wasn't natural. The footsteps stopped and started in odd patterns, sometimes too fast, sometimes with unnerving pauses, as though whatever was making them wasn't entirely human. Hello? The word slipped from my lips before I could stop it, my voice quivering. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched, suffocating and thick. Then came a new sound. Soft, raspy breathing, disturbingly close. I froze, certain I could feel it on the back of my neck. Whipping around, I knocked my chair against the floor. The hallway behind me was empty, its flickering lights creating shifting, chaotic shadows. My legs trembled as I edged backward, retreating to the supply closet. My fingers fumbled with the door as I slipped inside, closing it quietly behind me. I grabbed the first thing within reach, a heavy metal clipboard, and clutched it tightly. Outside the closet, the breathing continued, slow, deliberate, unhurried. I pressed myself against the shelves, my knuckles white as I gripped the clipboard like a lifeline. Then the closet lights flickered and went out, plunging me into complete darkness. My own ragged breathing filled the suffocating space, each heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum. The breathing outside the door grew louder, steady and deliberate, as though savoring the terror it evoked. And then it stopped. The silence was deafening, more terrifying than the noise. My chest heaved as I exhaled shakily, daring to hope that it was gone, that whatever it was had moved on, leaving me untouched. My fingers brushed the edge of the rule card in my pocket. I yanked it out, gripping it like a talisman. My eyes darted to Rule 7. If you hear whispers, do not reply. They are not speaking to you. I didn't have time to process the warning before. When the first whisper seeped through the door, it stopped me cold. Amanda. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. My name, spoken in a voice that wasn't quite right. It felt distorted, familiar, yet wrong, like someone mimicking a voice they'd heard once but couldn't fully replicate. The hairs on my neck bristled as the whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a chaotic symphony. Amanda, come out, we need you. Amanda, you can't leave. I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block out the sound, but it was useless. The voices weren't just outside the door anymore. They were inside my head, crawling through my thoughts like an infestation. I wanted to scream, to let it all out, but I bit down hard on my lip, remembering the rule. Don't reply. Don't acknowledge them. The whispers shifted, their tone turning harsher, angrier. They began chanting in unison, their words morphing into something incomprehensible, a guttural language that made my skin crawl. The air in the closet grew heavier, oppressive, as if it had been sucked out and replaced with something dark and suffocating. My chest tightened, each breath harder to draw, until suddenly everything stopped. Silence. I stayed frozen, waiting for the next move. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, the air lightening enough for me to breathe again. Slowly, I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. I didn't want to open it. I wanted to stay hidden, but the closet felt like a trap, and I couldn't stay there forever. When I finally cracked the door open, the hallway looked normal. The flickering lights had steadied. The shadows were gone. Everything was still, but the whispers weren't finished. They started again, faint and distant now, their source unmistakable. Room 6. The door was wide open. I'd closed it earlier, hadn't I? Yet now it stood ajar, spilling faint, flickering light into the hallway. The bulb inside struggled to stay alive, its erratic glow casting eerie shadows. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave this cursed hospital and never return. But something pulled me toward that room, something I couldn't define. Curiosity? Madness? Or was it the rules? The air grew colder as I approached, sharp and biting. My breath fogged in front of me, and the whispers drew me closer. They weren't in my head anymore, but floated from the open door, luring me like a siren's call. The rule card in my pocket felt heavy, its edges crinkled from my nervous grip. I scanned its words again. Rule 3. Never enter room 6 unless absolutely necessary. If the door is open, close it and leave immediately. I was sure I'd closed it earlier, but here it was again, wide open, expectant, daring me. My pulse thundered as I made my decision. Slowly, I pushed the door closed. The latch clicked, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The whispers stopped. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. The latch slid open on its own, the door creaking inward. The whispers returned, louder now, triumphant. The hospital wanted me inside. My heart pounded as I stepped over the threshold. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with something metallic, like blood. The single overhead light flickered violently, cutting the space into jagged, uneven bursts of brightness. The room was almost empty. A single hospital bed stood in the center, its white sheets tucked in meticulous precision. But something was wrong. The sheets bore indentations, faint impressions, as though someone invisible lay beneath them. My stomach churned. Against every instinct, I stepped closer, my hand reaching out hesitantly toward the empty bed. The sheets were icy to the touch, unnaturally cold. I snatched my hand back only to realize my fingertips were damp with condensation. A soft creak shattered the silence. I spun around to face the door. It had closed behind me. My heart raced as I rushed toward it, gripping the handle and yanking with all my strength. It wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with their chaotic symphony. Pressing my hands over my ears, I realized it was no use. The voices weren't just in the room, they were surrounding me, circling like predators. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching the rule card in desperation. Then the whispers stopped. A single clear voice spoke behind me, sending a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, my entire body tense as I turned slowly, my gaze falling on the bed. The impressions in the sheets were no longer vague. The outline of a body was unmistakable now. My breath hitched as the sheet began to rise and fall. Someone or something beneath it was breathing. "Leave," the voice repeated, softer this time, coming from the bed. But I couldn't leave. The door wouldn't open, and the walls seemed to press closer with every second. Panic clawed at my chest as I backed away, eyes fixed on the figure beneath the sheets. With agonizing slowness, the sheet began to slide down. Inches at a time, it revealed pale, bluish skin stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were closed, sunken deep in their sockets. as though this being had been decaying for decades. My breathing grew erratic, my knees weak, but I couldn't look away. The whispers turned into a low, vibrating hum, filling the room like trapped insects. My grip on the rule card tightened. Rule 4. Do not engage with the voices. If they seem directed at you, leave immediately. But how could I leave? The door remained sealed, and the figure under the sheets was unmistakably waking. Its eyelids fluttered before snapping open. The eyes were not human, milky and gray like twin moons, seeming to pierce through me. My breath hitched as the figure sat up unnaturally smoothly, its joints cracking in the oppressive silence. It turned its head toward me, the neck twisting with a sickening crunch. Its lips parted, revealing teeth so jagged they looked like shards of broken glass. "You don't belong here," it rasped, its voice like wind scraping through hollow bones. I stumbled backward, my back colliding with the door. "I didn't mean to, I just— Rule breaker," it hissed, its voice rising. The bed creaked as it swung its legs over the edge, planting bare feet on the cold tile. The hum in the walls intensified, joined by a faint tapping, like fingers drumming on glass. My fingers scrambled desperately at the doorknob, twisting and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew heavy and oppressive, pressing against my lungs like a vice. The figure stood now, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. It took a jerky, unnatural step toward me. The lights flickered violently, casting chaotic shadows on the walls. Then I noticed. The shadows weren't just of me and the figure. There were others. Dozens, maybe more, lingering in the room's corners, just beyond the light. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real." But it was. The shadows moved closer, their outlines sharpening. Whispers filled the air, overlapping in a chaotic cacophony that made my head pound. "You were warned," the figure said, its voice cutting through the noise. "You didn't listen." I didn't mean to break the rules," I stammered, holding the rule card like a shield. "I followed them, mostly. I tried." The figure tilted its head, studying me with lifeless eyes. "Once you enter room 6, the rules no longer matter." The lights flickered one last time before plunging the room into darkness. My scream echoed into the void as the last thing I saw was the figure lunging toward me, its jagged teeth bared in a grotesque grin. I woke up in my car, parked in the hospital lot. The steering wheel was cold beneath my palms, the clock on the dashboard blinking 3:33 a.m. My throat was raw as though I'd been screaming for hours, but I had no memory of escaping room 6. My uniform clung to me, damp with sweat, and the rule card I'd held onto so desperately was crumpled in my hand. The hospital loomed ahead, dark and silent, save for a faint light flickering in one of the upper windows. Room 6. The sight of it churned my stomach, bile rising in my throat. I turned the key in the ignition, desperate to escape this cursed place. The engine sputtered and died. Panic clawed at my chest as I tried again and again. Nothing. The silence outside was oppressive, pressing against my eardrums, amplifying the pounding of my heart. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting my skin. A low hum filled the air, faint and almost imperceptible, like the sound before a train rushes past. My gaze turned back to the hospital, and that's when I saw them. Figures moving behind the windows. Their movements were slow, deliberate, watching me. One of them was me. I stumbled back, my breath hitching as I saw my reflection, but it wasn't my reflection. It was like looking into a warped mirror. The figure wore my uniform, its movements eerily synchronized with mine, as though mocking me. Then, it raised its hand. Between its pale fingers, it held a rule card, identical to mine. I dropped my card, recoiling as though it burned me, but when I looked down, it wasn't there. I looked back up, and the figure was gone. In its place were dozens of faces pressed against the glass. Faces I recognized, the patients, the doctor, the voices I'd heard in the corridors. They were all there, staring at me, mouthing words I couldn't hear. And then I could hear them, clear as day. You're one of us now. My legs buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold pavement. The hum grew louder, rising into a deafening roar, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was back inside the hospital. Room 6. The bed was neatly made, the air stale, and the rule card was once again in my hand. But something had changed. The card was blank except for a single new rule. Your shift never ends. I ran to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't open. The whispers returned, growing louder, as shadows began creeping across the floor. I screamed, pounding my fists against the door, but no one came. No one ever would. To those reading this, if you ever find yourself working the night shift at a rural hospital, and they hand you a list of rules, burn it, and run. Because once you're inside, there's no going back. They don't want your help. They want you.